Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Happy Friday. Happy summer. I don't know where you all are in Wisconsin, but it was 95 degrees in Stevens Point yesterday, which is a little ridiculous even for August. So anyhow, my name is Kathy Shader. I am a consultant for the Marshfield Clinic Health System and the Wisconsin After School Network. I will be moderating this series of webinars, and we are pleased to be offering this learning series with the Marshfield Clinic Healthcare System and the Wisconsin Department of Administration. Today is the second of a four-part series on behavior interventions. This series was developed following a response to a needs assessment conducted by the Wisconsin After School Network this past fall. We are thrilled that Maddie Cook with Camp Corey in Mount Vernon, Washington is with us here this morning. And I'll give a little bit of background on Maddie in a moment. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Please keep your microphones on mute. If you have questions, we ask you to post those in the chat box, which the Marshfield Clinic staff will be monitoring. We will be fielding questions. Maddie, I'm going to interchange them, see? Maddie is going to ask for questions periodically, but don't hesitate to put questions in that chat box so we can get to them afterwards if we need to. And as a reminder, this presentation is being recorded and will be sent to all registered participants in the next week. I am pleased to introduce Matthew Cook, who has you have a master's in social work and has spent the last 30 years in the camping industry, 20 of those as a camp director and an executive director. Maddie started his professional camping career as the camp director at Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang Camp, a position that he held for 13 years. Hole in the Wall serves families and children dealing with chronic and life-threatening illness. And currently, Maddie is the Chief Program Officer at Camp Corey in Mount Vernon, Washington. Camp Corey is a member of the Serious Fun Children's Network founded by Paul Newman and serves families and children impacted by life-altering medical conditions. Maddie consults and teaches team building, program development, safety and risk management, staff training and support, and his own behavior development approach to help campers and staff reach their highest potential in their time at camp. And so, Maddie, I will turn this over to you. Welcome.
Great, Kathy. Thank you. You are an introducer of high quality. Thank you. That's very kind. I can also teach anybody to juggle in 30 minutes. So that should be on that list as well. Good morning, everybody. It's honestly a thrill to be here with you this morning to talk about behavior development and really to talk about getting ready for this season as we're getting ready in one of the strangest times for our industry once again to come together and to do the work that we do in a time that is without any exaggeration, crucial for the kids and the families that we serve. I'll start off by sharing a little bit of my background, and I'm going to just tell you guys my why right up front, so you know where I'm coming from. My favorite quote comes from actually Albert Einstein. Said that the life of the individual has meaning only insofar as it aids in making the life of every living thing nobler and more beautiful. The people on this call are dedicated to that same idea and that same spirit. To make the lives of every living thing nobler and more beautiful sometimes is fun and inspiring, and sometimes it has to do with some really hard planning and thinking and programming, and face to face it can look messy, and it can come with wiping noses and more, as well as high fives and appreciation. So I want to say thank you for the work that you all do. From back in the day, I am a after-school teacher at the Primavera Elementary School in Prescott, Arizona. And so my love for that space and that time and my understanding of what that space and time means to the children that you all serve and that I served is absolutely wonderful. So we're going to talk about behavior development, and behavior development is a very specific type of system developed over time. I came to sort of disdain the idea of the word behavior management, because I feel like with behavior management, we're just chasing behind people, asking them to change what they've done or to correct some misstep. So what we talk about is behavior development. We also use the CDP, which is the Contain, Discuss, and Plan model of intervention. That's a simplistic, codified method of approaching a conversation with a young person who may be struggling in your program. And the biggest thing is that we're trying to help kids by utilizing our own core beliefs from the inside out. We're not just helping from their inside out, it's really from our inside out. And that's why I share at the beginning sort of where I come from in terms of philosophy and what motivates me and where my why sits. If you're familiar with Simon Sinek, and Start With Why. If you don't have a copy of that book, grab it. But the idea that that we're helping kids from the inside out is really important to me in a way that that we'll talk about in terms of the core beliefs that we all bring to the work that we do, and that we bring people together around those same core beliefs of what we do with camp. So, quick background: you heard that I have a master's in social work. I did work with kids in the trauma space that were in group homes. They were removed from their families due to abuse and neglect. And I started my career working for a few years, which meant that I learned therapeutic crisis intervention. If anybody out there is looking for a method of de-escalation and dealing with outbursts and potentially even physically violent kids or situations that could come up, TCI is about 99% de-escalation skills and all of that, and the last part of it does have to do with physical interventions. But anybody who's familiar with that will see how that influenced the development of the behavior development system. I was 2 years in private clinical practice. I worked for 3 years at the VA with in the Healthcare for Homeless Vets program, and I also worked in the PTSD program for combat vets. And as was mentioned, I've been in the camping industry for 30 years. I walked onto the Hole in the Wall Gang camp as a counselor 30 years ago this year, and have been involved at the executive level. And now Camp Corey here in Mount Vernon, Washington is a small but growing camp in the Serious Fund Children's Network, and we serve kids and families that are dealing with chronic and life-threatening illnesses, and we do so completely free of charge to them. This it seems to be, there we go. So I'm curious, you know, when I start this presentation either in person or online, I always wonder, you know, who's out there? Are we talking to camp directors and program directors, assistant camp directors, teachers, of course the after-school programs, the medical support staff, mental health support staff, administrators, frontline program staff and camp staff, because at the end of the day, we all know that all of those categories collapse right down into that final category of frontline staff, frontline folks, because when there's a child in front of us who's struggling, and we know those situations are going to continue to present themselves, this year, as with any year, we definitely know that each one of us are going to bring our skills to bear with those kids. So we have a little bit today to be able to talk about the system that has developed over the years that I've come to call the behavior development model. We utilize our core beliefs, starting with where we come from and understanding ourselves and how we operate, and the core beliefs that we hold that influence the behavior and the reactions that we have to the young people that we're working with, if we're frontline, and certainly for managers with the staff that we're working with. Because as you hear this system today, I want you to think, anytime I talk about helping a child in crisis, we're also talking about helping staff in crisis, right? We know that that what we believe about people is what we believe about people, whether they're big people or little people. And so as we approach people with patience and generosity and compassion and kindness, and if those are our core beliefs, we know that that we're going to get a certain reaction and have a certain type of relationship to that individual. If we approach somebody with a lack of patience and a lack of generosity and a lack of compassion and a lack of kindness, we know that it's going to drive a certain kind of relationship, and we know which one we want to choose, right, over time. Sorry, oh, my watch is talking to me. So, I do want to go over some of those core beliefs so that we can talk about the ones that really matter, and the ones that have demonstrated themselves to be the most successful, from the people that I have worked with over these last years. Simon Sinek talks about people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, and what you do just serves as proof of what you believe. So when our behavior is bouncing back off the things that are happening to us as teachers, as frontline staff, and as managers, we know that our reactions are going to come off of those beliefs. We also know that we're going to have general strategies in the behavior development system. We have general strategies that are the things we're doing every day, all the time, in terms of our program, and we'll talk about that. We also have intervention strategies, which come in the form of the contain, discuss, and plan model. And the contain, discuss, and plan model is exactly what it sounds like. It's a hyper-intuitive model of approaching a situation, whether it be a behavioral situation, an emotional situation, and a relational situation, that we need to step in and help to approach and help a child or a staff member who may be struggling. So the CDP is what we call that. The CDP is a coaching process that we use, and it's to help. It's to do two things. One thing that we know, and if you don't believe that the beauty of a child leaving hopefully the safe confines of their home and coming to a school program, or coming to an after-school program, or coming to a day camp program, one of the things that's going to happen is that they are going to struggle. They're going to have a struggle relationally. They're going to have a struggle with the material, the timing, the schedule, and that's exactly what we want, right? If you don't believe that kids should struggle when they get outside the home, it's probably not a good idea for you to go into this industry and this business, because the struggle is where the growth happens, right? There's stress, and then there's eustress, and eustress is the kind of stress that's good for us and pushes us and helps us to grow. So I want to frame that around this coaching process, that what we're doing is we're coaching kids along through that process to lengthen their line, if you will, to build coping skills and to help them to grow as individuals, not just for this moment, but so that this moment can be the testing ground, the proving ground, the dojo for them to practice those skills that they then take out into the world with them. So if you think about this in the sports context, it's for a kid who's on the field that's struggling, and you're calling them off the field and you're giving them a little coaching and you're putting them back in the game. Or it's the child who won't get off the bench and get into the game, and you're sitting down and you're having a conversation with that child to help them along. We never move in to manage a child's behavior or to solve problems for them, because all we do is rob them of the growth and the potential that they have. And so we are constantly in the form of coach, not manager. So simply put, the more that we foster the growth and development on the inside, when we talk about inside out, the more adaptive the behavior that we see from the child or the adult on the outside. So this idea of adaptive, you're going to hear me saying adaptive a lot. And I think when I think of adaptive behavior, what I'm talking about is almost finding the right puzzle piece, the right answer, the right skill, the right behavior for a young person to apply to a situation, so that the outcome is the best it can possibly be for them. So when we talk about adaptive behaviors, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about them adapting to our schedule or adapting to our program. We're talking about them finding the most adaptive way for them to move forward and to grow and to be healthy. So this is the part of the presentation where I want to talk about where we are now in the world. We're continuing after 2 years of struggle with the pandemic and the shutdown, and I know a lot of us have utilized and a lot of us have heard the term traumatic tossed around about this experience. And I don't know if that fits in your definition for traumatic that you've held in your head for a long time. I've had interesting conversations with people who argue on both sides. I want to define the trauma of this experience in some very real ways. And it does, to me, rise to that level of trauma because I use the idea of, from my own experience, we go back to our own experience to understand things that are happening with us now. So when I go back to my experience and I look at the challenges that my 3 children, my wife and I have met throughout this pandemic and those that we're connected to deeply and our families and our friends, I look at the stressors that have been out there, and it reminds me of the situations that I have seen over time with the medical trauma that I've watched our campers go through for the last 30 years. And when I talk about medical trauma, I'm talking about the challenges and the daily perdition of children who are dealing with, and their families, their siblings, their parents who are dealing with the challenges of having a serious and life-threatening illness, perhaps like cancer, or a serious blood disease like HIV or sickle cell. Over the years, having worked with young people who deal with these things, there is a set of principles or a set of symptoms and factors that really define it as traumatic. When I started working at the camps, the term medical trauma hadn't even been coined yet. So when I say trauma, I want you to understand that what I'm talking about is an experience that is intense, pervasive, ongoing, unpredictable, restricted movement of your life in general, but also physically of where you can and can't go. The social isolation that this kind of trauma brings on, the disruption to normal supply chain, and that could be the supply chain that brings food into your house. It could be the supply chain of the necessities that you have with your family. It's a disruption to that. It's an economic hardship. It causes you to be in and out of school. It's a disruption to life routines. And when I talk about life routines, I'm talking about those things, the sports, the church activities, the local community activities, the type of things that are impacted both when you happen to be a child and a family that are dealing with a serious illness, or when you're dealing with a global pandemic and everything that we've all experienced as this has descended on us. And then pervasively and across the country, across the world, we're looking at sickness, infirmity, and death, right? And that kind of grief and the kind of loss that accompanies these things makes this, helps me to define this as a traumatic experience for all of us. And if I use an analog or a comparative for the experience that I have had in this last 2 years, I look back to that experience that I've seen at camp, and honestly, that experience at camp is what helped to develop this whole concept of the behavior development model. It's what this model grew in a trauma-informed environment, even before we used the term trauma-informed environment, maybe even before we knew we were working in a trauma setting. We were still utilizing these same techniques, and I can tell you, tried and true, that these techniques do work to help grow coping skills and to bring kids to their best self day after day. So the journey toward healing, when we look at what are the steps along the way that happen inside of a program, when we're designing program, the left side of your screen talks about participation. The right side of your screen goes all the way to adaptation, where we end up sort of adapting to this new normal and it develops. There are parts of our program that we need to see in order to see this growth. The first step, obviously, is just getting somebody to show up, right? Getting a kid to come to our program that is intentionally designed to help them to develop these skills. We need them to stick around. We need them not to come and then disappear, but to invest. We need them to be curious. That curiosity comes with a touch and a taste of that experience and wanting to know more. And so we need them to be curious, and they need to display some active interest. We can do all the work we want to do to put together a great program, but until we can, at the base level, develop these pieces, we're not going to get any further into the trail, into the journey of healing, if we don't have those as the first step. The next step is engagement, and we're engaging in the program, and our participants are engaging in connection with others. They're building pro-social skills, friendship skills. They're having experiences of self-efficacy. So they're making decisions, they're trying things, and even failing at things and trying again, things that they feel are consequential, that really matter. It's not just doing some pottery and throwing a pot on the wheel and failing to keep that up, but it's really some challenges that become a stepwise progression of skill building. So that engagement includes some experiences of self-efficacy and competence. And then a big one for me, a huge one for me, is contribution. That very early on in the process of a journey towards healing from that space of being disenfranchised, that space of being in the victim mindset or the disempowered mindset, the journey to being a confident, competent human being, and somebody that's ready to contribute to their family, to their society, comes through the learning and the steps of contribution. I have something to give to this environment. So that's why we build things in, like even the little steps of cleaning up after yourself, the little steps of the older kids assisting with the younger kids from time to time. These are pieces of engagement where it makes a difference to that person, because I always feel like if there's no reason that I'm here, then there's no reason for me to be here. And if it's simply put, but the idea is that if I don't have a contribution to make, then it doesn't matter that I'm here. So every day, with our kids, certainly with our, I think of this with my kids at home. I think of it with my kids at camp, and I think of it with my staff, my young adult staff as well. I'm always thinking about how can I develop a sense of contribution where they are invested and they feel that sense of competence, confidence, community, character, compassion that we want them to develop. The next level is commitment, and so you go through they're participating, they're getting engaged, and then that commitment level comes up where they start to show that those challenges that they faced at the beginning are getting easier, and they're using the skills and they're using the coping skills and the strategies that they've learned in order to get over those things, and they develop those coping skills to address the biggest stressors that they had, whether that was a social stressor, it's a kid who struggles with perfectionism or a fear of failure, and you have kids facing those things with a greater sense of self-compassion and a greater sense of competence, because they're going on this journey towards healing from that disempowered and victim mindset. And finally, there's adaptation, where that self-story and the self-talk become more positive. You don't hear the put-downs and the I can'ts in that same cadence, and the child makes consistently healthy choices for themselves. So this fits into that behavior development model, because our goal is always to give our kids the opportunity to choose their next best moment. And if we try to engineer those things, they'll never build the skills to find the path themselves, right? It's like putting a blindfold on them and leading them through the maze, bringing them back to the beginning and expecting them to be expert at it. If we don't give them the chance to challenge themselves and to learn and to go through this process, then we don't have that. And you all will receive my presentation here, so you'll be able to go back and take a good look at these slides. And these are components of a program for me that help with the trauma-informed process to bring you from victim mindset to really the hero of your own story. I'll pause there. Kathy's keeping an eye on the chat just to see if any questions come up. And if anybody does have any questions, please don't hesitate. We can pause. I decided to forego the chat room side of things to keep it more fluid and be able to touch base with you guys throughout the chat. So if there are any questions, Kathy, don't hesitate to kind of raise your hand and let me know. Thank you. So how did the behavior development and CDP come to be? I've touched on it a little bit, but the Hole in the Wall Gang camp got started, and this is Paul Newman, philanthropist, race car driver, actor in that order, who's enjoying lunch in the dining hall at the Hole in the Wall Gang camp back in 1992. His experience of playing Butch Cassidy put him in touch with the myth of the hole in the wall, which was the hideout for the Wild Bunch, the Hole in the Wall Gang that they became called, and it was their place to hide out from the world, and so Newman had the idea of putting together this camp for kids that were dealing with serious illness, and when he did, he named it the Hole in the Wall Gang so that they would feel like they were part of this connected, belonging group of people who were hiding out from the world together. The idea that the way that camp sort of works, with my good friend Lou Burkholtz from Edgework Consulting, Lou and I worked together years ago, and one of his quotes that really fit for me in terms of how camp works is that he said, "This is about imperfect solutions to complex realities." Which is a wonderful way to think about what you guys do every day. Anybody who works with young people in a broad sense, trying to be, whether you're in school during the day, you're in school afterwards, you're part of a community program or a camp program that has a set of outcomes and goals that you're striving for, you can't control for all of the variables. Certainly you can't control the weather, you can't control the environment that your kids are coming from when they arrive in your care. You can't control where they go back to. You can't control the weather that's happening while you're there even. And sometimes we can't even control our own budgets to be able to do all the things that we hope to do. So this is an imperfect solution to complex realities, and the complex realities are the lives of the children that we're working with. And so what we do every day is we just do our best. We bring our best self to the work, and we show up day after day with a sense of this show's not about me. This show is about the young people that I'm working with, and I'm going to do my best for them. So this idea of behavior development came out of not wanting to rob our kids of this opportunity of growth that camp and being away from home presents. Those practical pathways that we just talked about, from participation to adaptation, that we have to in our programs, and I implore you guys to look closely at the model that you're using. I often say that that consistency in our outcomes is derived from consistency in our model. And if we bring consistency in our approach to what we're doing, we think about all aspects of how we control the environment that we're in. What's the lighting like? What's the noise level like? What's the heat and temperature like? How is that going to play on the goals that I have and what I'm looking for in terms of outcomes for this experience? And as we look at healing trauma, there's a specific set of needs that we want to meet. And this presentation is not intended to make you an expert in trauma-informed care. It's just to touch on some of those. So as you go out to inform yourselves about your programs and how this trauma-informed practice plays out on the ground where you are, it's to say that this consistent approach is really, really important. The program structure, adaptive activities to the young people that you're serving, knowing your population, language that works for everyone, and that language today includes things that 10 years ago we didn't even really talk about our pronouns. We didn't talk about the gender inclusivity and the things that are part of the approach now. No matter how we feel about it, it's impact over intent. And so our intent is always to be open-minded and supportive and kind to the young people we're serving. And so to approach them, their parents, their families, our community, with language that works for everybody, creating a highly intentional social context of safety, respect, and love. And I throw that out there, and I used to do this in training. I would talk about, because that was something that we talked about quite a bit at the Hole in the Wall Gang camp, was this concept of we want everybody at camp all the time to feel safe, to feel respected, and to feel loved. If you feel those things, then you get to Maslow's fourth level of belonging, right? And that's such an important piece of who we are in order to move towards our highest self and to continue to grow as individuals. That sense of belonging is a key component for us. So when I talk about safety, respect, and love, I always think about, that can mean a lot of different things to different people. What we learned early on at the Hole in the Wall Gang camp, when we started, as I said, we thought we were serving kids whose bodies were sick. If that makes sense. We thought we were bringing kids in and we were going to provide for their medical care, but we were just going to go and have fun with these kids in a camp setting in the safest and most adaptive way possible. But what we learned was that, number one, this idea of spontaneity and Mr. Newman talked about camp being a place where you could kick back and raise a little hell, and that's what we want our campers to do. So that idea of raise a little hell really took root there in the first years, and it was the wild, wild west. But what we learned very quickly was kids need structure in order to feel safe enough to play, to truly play. Kids will do something that is more like parallel play that you see from toddlers and little ones when they're together, where there's 3 or 4 kids and they look like they're playing together, but they're actually sort of, everybody's doing a different game. They're playing, you ask one kid and they're pretending to be cooking a meal, and the other kid is over here playing cops and robbers, and it looks like they're playing together. Kids will do that kind of play even further on in development if they don't feel safe enough in that social context to authentically be themselves. So putting structure in place gets you there. It doesn't mean that you take away any of the fun and spontaneity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But our programs become, as I said, this training this space, this classroom or this dojo where you get to practice new skills right there, on site, in the moment, intentionally, that then become metaphoric and transferable to the challenges that we face in the outside world, so that the growth and the healing ultimately take root. So for us to be able to have these experiences and to connect with our kids and give them this structured space where they feel that social context of openness and support and belonging, it becomes, as I said, metaphoric and transferable to their life outside of camp. The behavior development model started in the world of kids who experienced all that medical trauma, and when we built that social context, the definition of those things is really important. To me, safety means physical safety, emotional safety, social safety, spiritual safety, all the ways that a young person can authentically show up and not fit in. Because when we fit in, what we do is we change who we are to meet the context around us, and to hide parts of ourselves that we don't think are going to be acceptable to others. But to really not just fit in, but to belong. And that sense of belonging is what we hear so much. And when we were talking on the call before we got into the training, the concept of kids showing up to camp and having the opportunity to be themselves and we hear this in different spaces. Kids form different kinds of social and relational connections based on the depth of the level of safety they feel. And so if we're doing our very best, our kids will show up. And of course they're going to be physically, of course they're going to be emotionally, but are they going to be socially, spiritually safe to be who they are in that context? The next one is respect, and that's respect from adult to child. It's respect from a child to an adult. It's also respect for self and for others. And I had a wonderful teacher who named Julio Olaya, who once said to me that respect is an emotion that allows for the perspective of others. And that changed because I thought respect was something that existed as a value that I held. I hold respect as a value that I want to give to people. And when he said it was an emotion, and then he defined emotions, and this is a kind of a mind-blowing concept, but emotions are nothing but a predisposition to act in a certain way, right? So if you, that emotions don't come from nowhere and they don't go nowhere. An emotion is a predisposition to act in a certain way. If I find myself feeling frustrated and that's my emotional state, then I'm going to act in frustrated ways. If I find myself feeling loved, I'm going to act in loving ways. If I feel myself frightened, I'm going to act in a frightened way, right? So an emotion is just a descriptor of a predisposition to act in a certain way, and that's what comes out of us. Well, respect is an emotion, and when I feel respect, it's an emotion that allows for the perspective of others. I don't have to change what you think. I don't have to comment on what you think. I can just love you for loving, I can love you for what you love. I can love you for your thoughts and who you are. It doesn't mean that you can't be yourself. It just helps to build that idea of an emotional space that has respect for others. And that's a concept that is even more important today than it has been in the past. Love has tried to be defined by every poet that's ever come along, but I think when I wrote this, I was writing from the camp context that I had experienced, and love is the recognition of the connectedness and the commitment that we have to one another and the camp community, and it's a willingness to reach out to others. So in this context, when I'm talking about a sense of safety, respect, and love, the love is the connectedness that we feel. So it's an inherent connectedness to the others that are around us, and we can do things every day from the moment that our kids walk into our programs, from the moment our staff arrive for their first day of work, to build that sense of you belong here and that connectedness just because you're here. For no other reason. You are complete and whole and beautiful because you showed up. Thanks for being here. And the commitment to one another in the camp community, that we're part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And when we can do that with our programs, we will create experiences that will literally become mythological in the lives of our kids. And I wish we could go back and have a conversation with each of you about those moments in your life when you've been part of a community or a group that has felt like you were someplace bigger than yourself and you were connected to that. And I hope you all have that as a memory. A willingness to reach out to others is literally the sense of compassion that we have for those people that are around us. And in the context of the Serious Fun camps and kids that are dealing with different illnesses, you see 3 boys in this picture. And the 3 boys in this picture all have had very different life experiences. And all 3 of those boys were the best of friends that you could possibly imagine, who had no hesitation to talk about how they loved one another, and that their cabin was a group of really, really good friends. And though their life experience was different and their backgrounds were different, and one of the boys was even from another country, they were coming together with a willingness to reach out to one another because they saw in that other child's experience a similar struggle that they had had. And if we could all do that, we would be in that social context all the time. So the common ground kinds of behaviors that we deal with at camp are, and in after-school programs in the classroom. I've done these trainings with classroom teachers. there's a common ground of behaviors that we run into. One of them is social laddering, cliques, bullying, exclusion. Another is refusing to participate, right? Too cool for school kind of behavior, or just the child who's so reluctant and so shy that they're reserving, or anxious that they're reserving themselves to the back of the line of the group, to the edge of the circle. Unsafe behavior in program, disruptive behavior in transitions and in line, for residential camps, disruptive behavior at bedtime, and then aggressive behavior from a child. These are, I hope as you're hearing these, you're kind of seeing some of the children and the behaviors and the struggles that you may end up dealing with in your programs. These are all things that the behavior development model and the CDP are. It's not a silver bullet, but it's an approach that gives you a context to step into those. It gives you a script and a way to move through those conversations in such a way that each of these things is very much addressable by this sort of broad and simple system. The one thing that I would say is, when you have behavior that's aggressive from a child, you can have reactive aggression or proactive aggression. When we think of the proactive aggression side, that's an area where the CDP is not necessarily equipped for that child who's going to come into your program and act out violently, right? It isn't a restrictive, and this is when you have a child that's at that place, that's when you have to go into further measures and have more planning around the treatment and the care and the supervision of a child who might be proactively aggressive. The child who's reactively aggressive, when somebody pushes them down, they get up and they push back, or those are all conversations that you can have, because that reaction to the aggression comes from a different place. So I hope that makes sense. So we talked about the core beliefs that we have that drive our relationship building and our connection building with the young people that we work with, or if we're in the management position, with the staff that work with us as well. And those core beliefs that we hold, I've outlined 6 of those that are that they're not prescriptive. I'm not telling you that you need to believe these things. What I'm telling you is that they're descriptive of the very best people that I've worked with in terms of being leaders or being teachers. And I'm often heard saying in the camp program, and certainly when I was working at the school level as well, that constantly we are in the role of teacher and leader, no matter where we are and what we're doing, when we have our kids in that connection space inside our program. So these are the 6 core beliefs. We'll run through these kind of quickly, but the idea is that the first core belief is that all children have some capacity to make positive behavioral choices with support. If they could, they would. You can do it. We can help, right? Like Home Depot. If you hold this as a core belief for yourself, if this is something that you innately believe, that when you run into a child whose behavioral choices are not positive, and they're struggling, and you're seeing behaviors maybe for the first, maybe for the 5th time, that are non-pro-social behaviors, that are disruptive behaviors, that are challenging. If you believe that some kids are just broke and they're not worth your time, then you're going to react to that child in a certain way. And I always say that you can do behavior modification, you can do behavior management from across the room. I have a very loud whistle that I can do, and I can stop behavior from 30 yards away. People stop and turn around and look, right? I can yell at someone. I can become violent with my voice, and I can yell at someone to get them to stop a behavior. That's not what we want to do, right? We want to help teach. So if I believe that some kids are broke, that's how I'm going to approach it. But if I believe that all children and all adults have some capacity to make positive behavioral choices with support, that idea, that last part of it, with support, means that involves me, right? That involves me being patient. That involves me moving closer to and joining with that young person to scratch my head and figure out what's going on in this situation. And it moves me into relationship. The only way you have influence, the only way that you're going to be able to teach and connect with and help a child grow is to be in relationship to them. You can't do it from a distance. You can't sprinkle it on them from 10,000 feet above. You have to be in connected relationship with a child in order to see that growth, a connected relationship with another human to see that. And it's true for my golden retriever as well. So all children have some capacity to make positive behavioral choices with support. If they could, they would. You can do it. We can help. That's the first core belief. The second is that all behavior is goal-directed. Children do what they do to get what they need, and behavior problems are just a poor game plan. If I believe that, and I believe that first one, then what am I going to do? I'm going to move in. When a child is struggling in behavior, I'm going to move in and I'm going to try to figure out, again, scratching my head and saying, what goal does this child have by this behavior, right? Because they're trying to meet a goal. And sometimes the goal might be that classic one that somebody will throw out there, which is they're just looking for attention. Okay, maybe you should give them some attention, right? If a child is starved of attention and they're looking for attention, let's figure out a way to help them get that attention in a pro-social, in an acceptable way for the context that they're living in at the moment. But if we believe that all behavior is goal-directed, then what we're going to end up becoming is a behavior detective, right? It's not the behavior that I see right in front of me. I'm going to be looking beyond that. I may see a child yelling, standing in the middle of the room, yelling out loud. I may see a child who is sulking off in the corner and not engaging with other children. If I don't get curious and I don't become a behavior detective, I will never help that child meet that need that they're trying to meet, right? So all behavior is goal-directed. The best people that I know who are extraordinary with kids believe this really firmly. So look for that goal and help them build that bridge. Core belief number 3 is that boundary and limit testing are central to a child's development. I wrote this next part. It sounds like a textbook. Independent functioning is learned through the testing of boundaries and the discovery of consequences. What that means is, and a good friend of mine, Winston Long, once said, he said, what's a kid's job? And you know, if we were in the auditorium all together, I'd have you yell out, what's a kid's job? And oftentimes I'll hear, you know, learning, growth, play is a kid's job. I'll hear, you know, rainbows, unicorns, popcorn. And what Winston would say all the time is that, no, he'd say, you're all wrong. A kid's job is to piss you off. Because if they're pissing you off, they're bumping up against their boundaries, and they're learning as a result of that friction that they're feeling. Winston worked with some very challenging kids at what used to be referred to as a reform school, but he worked in a very intense environment with kids who had many diagnoses after their name, many initials after their names. But what Winston pointed out was that kids are sponges, and what I believe really strongly is that that boundary and limit testing are central to a child's development. So when I see a kid pushing buttons and pushing boundaries, I want to make sure that when I see that, even though it could be frustrating to me as the person who's trying to lead the group and do the things that I need to do, I have to be able to say that boundary and limit testing is central to their development. Doesn't necessarily mean, unless I'm Mother Teresa or Mahatma Gandhi, that I'm not going to get frustrated. It might mean that I have to take a step back and remember this. And when I remember this, my behavior changes, right? Because I experience something, I have a thought about it, and then a feeling comes out of me from that thought, right? That's the whole premise of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? I have an experience, I have a thought about that experience, and so these core beliefs become that alteration of where my behavior gets changed as an individual. And so boundary and limit testing are central to a child's development. If you believe that children should do what they're told the moment they're told to do it, again, you're probably going to be a very frustrated person in the child care space. So maybe think of another career. Core belief number 4 is that camp is more than fun. Okay, so fit in your context there. School is more than fun. After school programs are more than fun. Day camp is more than fun. Camp is more than fun. And I have had this debate with people for 30 years now. My feeling is that fun is a byproduct of a perceived safe and playful environment. And that environment includes physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. So fun is a byproduct. When you find yourself in a space of belonging, then you can enjoy the activities that you're doing, because your level of arousal, your level of alertness, your level of looking out for the dangerous thing that's going to happen is diminished, and you can just enjoy the space that you're in. So you got to remember that your program is more than fun. It's not just entertainment, and as you're out there in that space, it's important to be intentional about creating that space so that when you do move into the activities, that the enjoyment is there. Core belief number 5 is that your relationship to the individual and the group is key to success with children. So if your relationship is key to your success, it's something that you're going to invest in because you want to be successful. The biggest tool we have when we work with human beings is an established relationship. So what do we do? What are the things we do in order to create those relationships on day one of the program? When kids are arriving and they're streaming into your classroom or your playground or your camp space, in those first moments, I'm sure everybody out there is thinking, I'm going to learn their names. I'm going to learn some facts about them. I'm going to ask them questions about where they're coming from and what their experiences are. And so I can draw them into a space where they see I'm curious and I'm interested in them. Doing that puts money in that bank that you may need to draw out later, right? So when you invest your energy and your curiosity and your care, when that child moves into a crisis moment, when that child feels unsafe, you may be the only person that has taken the time to do that relationship building, and you may be the person that can bring them back to a place of safety. So the relationship, and a lot of times we hire people into positions to work frontline in our programs who are really good at the individual side. And it's important that we recognize that the group, being able to lead a group, talk to a group, understand the dynamics within a group, is not as intuitive for humans as is the individual kind of relationship that we build. And so in your training, being intentional about, and in your hiring, being intentional about talking about group management and group communication, and knowing that the person coming in has both sides of those skills. Last one, core belief number 6, is that the minute you enter a power struggle with a kid, you've already lost. The corollary to that is unless you're willing to overpower them physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. And we don't do that here, right? I mean, the idea is that if you're a person who finds yourself saying, because I said so, now get in line, again, you may be frustrated in the child care space, in the education space, in the programming space. So we could spend the next 6 hours sitting here online talking about how to get out of power struggles. My advice is don't get into power struggles. My advice is to find those places where you're getting into that tug of war, and be able to subvert that in the best way possible. That when you put expectations out there, you understand that your expectations are not everybody's expectations. I do an exercise, and I'll offer this to you guys at some point today, after this, maybe soon after you get offline this morning. I want you to walk up to somebody and say, hey, do me a favor, would you just put your hand up like this? And when they put their hand up, just gently match their hand, and then start to slowly and gently push against them. Don't say another word, just slowly and gently. This should be somebody, not a stranger on the street, by the way. This is somebody you know, hopefully. But have them hold their hand out and you start to push on it. What you'll experience is that as you push slowly, they will push back. And pretty soon, you could be leaning in and pushing off of the person and leaning right against them. I demonstrate that. It's actually a principle in Aikido that when somebody's pushed against, they push back, right? And that's what happens here. It happens, we're hardwired in our bodies to resist change. And so when we ask somebody to change their behavior, we're asking for an enormous amount of self-control and executive functioning, and there are some distinct tasks that they have to be able to perform in order to be successful in that change. So we have to be patient, we have to be supportive, and we have to be understanding if they struggle with that, and we have to come around the block over and over. But when we get into the power struggles, and you know the people that are doing this, you are very much going to be a person, they are very much going to be a person who struggles and gets very frustrated. So those are the core beliefs, guys. When you build your team, I want to say there's a quote from the author of The Little Prince, Saint-Exupéry, who says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to gather wood and divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vastness and endless sea. So when you think about building a program that has these components to it, you're not just going out there and you're not being so focused and deliberate that you're looking for that human being that you can ask direct questions to, and they'll tell you, yes, these are the things. You're having a conversation where you're getting at their core beliefs. Your conversation should not be, what would you do if? They should be, what did you do when conversations. So you're doing behavioral, it's called behavioral interviewing. If you're familiar with it, great. The other part of it is that people don't come to work for you because of you. They come to work for you because of them, and that they believe what you're doing is important. So if you know anything about the journey of the endurance and Ernest Shackleton, back in the 1800s, Shackleton put an ad in the paper in London and said, men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. So how many people would answer this ad on this call? How many people would answer this ad and say, yeah, I'm in, that's great? Because people did answer this ad and people did go on that journey, and it was an extraordinary story. But he didn't put an ad in and puff it up and say, hey, this is going to be a lot of fun. So when you are reaching out to find the people to staff your programs, one of the really important things, and when you're training those people, one of the really important things is to continually put out your mission and what you do and what you expect and the benefits of your program, so that you can connect to people who connect to the beliefs and the mission that you're on. So I'll pause there for a second. If there are any questions on core beliefs, I'm happy to have you throw those out there. Kathy, is there anything in the chat?
Not yet, but sometimes it takes people a minute if they have something.
Great. Don't hesitate to throw it out there, guys. When it comes to those core beliefs, if you have a thought it's not just a question, if you have a thought or something that aligns with that or doesn't align with that, I'm glad to hear it and talk about it. Now we're going to get into the behavior development side of things and the actual practical use of these skills.
We do have a question before you run into that. So the question is, how do you manage cultural differences in core beliefs between staff and children?
That's great. Well, first of all, we're not there. We're there presenting a program that is going to be beneficial and meet the needs of the kids that we're serving. And so it's important for us to understand and know the cultural needs that they have, and to meet those cultural needs. Sometimes our own cultural needs need to be more explicit. And I think in our organizations in the last probably 15, 20 years, we've become more aware and more sensitive to understanding cultural differences in terms of addressing behaviors or in terms of communication in ways that have perhaps respected people a little bit more in the workspace. But I always go back to understanding that in the staff position, you're in a position of power. And you need to recognize that, and it's important to meet the children where they're at and meet the client where they're at, and offer them as much understanding, and that we sometimes have to move culturally ourselves toward the child to create that relationship and join with them. So learning as much as we can and teaching our staff, making sure that we are as aware of the cultural needs of our client group as possible. So in terms of coaching versus directing, this is where I mentioned the idea that, you're offering some guidance. You're not telling somebody what they need to do moment to moment. The general strategies that we do, the must-haves and must-dos all the time, having a compelling program with a high fun factor and engagement is important. A rich environment of positive reinforcement. This is where I'll offer to you the concept of the not the hey, nice job or good work or the thumbs up from a distance, but what we call around here the DLP, the describe it, label it, praise it. When you see a behavior that you appreciate from a young person, taking the time, taking that moment to describe the behavior, to label what that behavior is called and what it demonstrates, and then to praise it in a way that reinforces the act that the child did. It takes more time, and it takes more time. And so it's really a powerful tool. Just this past weekend, we had a family arrive at camp who were here for a family weekend that we were running. This one little girl was an only child. It was she and her parents that were here. And it was very clear that they were uncomfortable in the camp opening campfire setting. They were very quiet and very reserved. When we were all singing songs, clapping and hooting and hollering, I saw some foot tapping was the extent of their involvement. And about halfway through the campfire program, this little girl got up and approached me, and she spoke softly, and I leaned in and she said, "Pardon me, Matthew, but could you tell me where I might find a glass for some water?" And I just stood there for a second and shook my head, and I said, you just came all the way over here in the most polite manner, and you asked me for my help in such a sweet way. I said, you're such a very polite person. I really admire that, right? Describe it, label it, praise it. I walked over, I got her a glass, she got some water, she went and sat down. 2 days later, her mom came to me and said that when they were talking about highlights of the weekend, what this little girl said was that her favorite moment of the weekend was when Maddie told her that she was a really polite person. Those things go right through all the layers, right to the heart. And so a rich environment of positive reinforcement is not just a lot of good jobs and high fives and patting on the back. Structuring the environment, having a schedule that's clear and accessible to everybody, to know your children's strengths and weaknesses and to play with them constantly. That has to do with building relationships and getting to know our kids as deeply as we can. To manage the whole group, not to have 7, 10 kids together and having them go in 7 different directions, but sometimes you have to be the most interesting thing in the room for a moment to pull everybody's attention together and lead the group. And those are skills that we can build. And anticipate potential problems and deal with them when they're molehills and not mountains, right? So teaching our staff to stay aware, stay connected, stay engaged so that they can catch those things and do something positive in the process. The intervention strategy, as we've talked about, is contain, discuss, and plan. This comes out of the idea that we're helping them make that better behavioral choice. So we're just helping them with that last step of the process of learning. So before you engage, if you were to be there when there was an altercation between 2 kids, before you went in to engage that situation, before you blow the whistle, the first thing you do is stop and check yourself. How am I feeling? Am I the right person to be addressing this situation? What do I know about the situation? Look at the environment. Understand what's happening as best you can before you dive in there, unless it's a situation of safety. Listen to what's happening with this child in this situation. We've all had the experience of having a caring adult come to us and say, how many times have I had to tell you? Or this is just like that thing that you did the other day. If you didn't deal with it the other day, then you don't have the right to bring it up and sort of hit a kid over the head with it. The way that we address behavioral situations successfully is that we talk about what just happened and we do it when it happens so that we're not coming back to a kid about something that they probably have no emotional or cognitive memory of the situation that's going to really be productive in their learning. So address it immediately and address the situation that you're seeing right there at the moment. You need to create safe emotional space. You need to join with the child. Joining with the child has to do with letting them know that they're not in trouble. I want to figure this out with you. If the child's done something that's going to require a consequence, not lying to them about that, but being able to say, I'm stepping away from my thoughts, my needs, my desires, and I'm stepping toward your needs to help you adapt to this situation and to solve what we both agree on is a problem. So you're joining, you're remembering your core beliefs about that situation, which helps you to move into relationship, and you're remembering that the show is not about you. The highest level of leadership is caring more about the situation and the outcome for the other person than it is for yourself. So how do you know in terms of contain, discuss, and plan? The first one here is a stoplight, so it's contain the behavior. And that means to separate the child from the problem or separate the problem from the child. And that can look like establishing a supportive connection with that child, being able to say, I'm on your side, I'm here to help. How are you feeling? Are you okay? That changes the mood because what is that child thinking in that moment? They're thinking, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. The adult's here and there's going to be consequences, rather than, hey, somebody's here to help me through the process. Once you do this a few times with kids, you'll get to see something really extraordinary happen in the relationships that you build. You help the child calm down, and that can be, let's take a walk, a break, a breather. If you need to play 5 minutes of a game of kick the dirt in order to then be able to problem solve, then we'll do that. If we need to walk around the building, I'll let the other adults know, and we'll make sure we're in sight of everybody else, but I'm going to take you out for a walk so you can get some of that energy to be able to bring you down, because what happens when we're escalated emotionally is our cognition goes down. So the more escalated that we are, the less capable we are of the kind of thinking and problem solving that we really need to be able to do. So I'm on your side. Let's take a walk, a break, a breather. Let's work on this together. And always joining, it says down at the bottom there, always joining with the child. Man, that was hard. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Tell me more. When you have contained the behavior, you know it's a green light to move on from containing the behavior when the child is no longer engaging in unsafe behavior. They put the rocks down. Right? They're not throwing the rocks anymore. They put the rocks down. They are not yelling at another kid. They're not in somebody's face. They're not sitting off to the side in tears and crumpled in the corner. They're no longer in that sort of space of not being able to engage. The child is settled in a quiet area. The child is calm enough to talk through or describe what happened. That's about cognition. And the child has heard that the adult is there to help. The emotional safety is established. Once you've been able to do that, and again, as I'm doing this, your meta process mind, your adult executive functioning should be thinking that your staff are also in this mix, right? This is how we approach everybody. So we've contained the behavior, and this is how we know we've contained it. We discuss the behavior. You're all going to get a cheat sheet with all of this on it to practice it with staff if you'd like the end of the presentation. To discuss the situation, discussing has to do with getting them to tell their story. When they've told their story, then you help them discover the connection between feelings and behaviors. Oh, okay. So when that child said to you that they thought your piece of art was a piece of junk, that hurt your feelings. And when they insulted you and you got your feelings hurt, you pushed them. So sometimes when you get your feelings hurt, you might get physical and push somebody. Oh, okay. Can you remember a time that happened before? And very often if a child has experienced that and they connect the feelings to behaviors, right? That's when they become aware enough that the next time that they start to feel that feeling, they'll be able to sublimate or change that behavior on the backside. So now we're teaching them these coping skills, right? So in the discussion, they tell their story, they tell their side of what happened, and you listen, right? That's a really important part of this. You discover the connection between feelings and behaviors, and then they hear from another person's point of view, namely you, what you saw. So yeah, I came around the corner and I saw you with this rock in your hand, and you threw the rock towards the building, and I thought, oh gosh, I hope nobody's over there, and I got really scared. That's why I came over to address you, and I said, stop, don't throw rocks. I was really scared that something bad could happen. So hear about their behavior from another person's perspective. When you pushed that other child down, I was afraid they were going to get hurt. And so I saw you as the person that was being more aggressive and upset. And that really worried me because I care about you and I care about this other person. So if you've discussed, this is the discussion portion. This is a really key piece. If you've discussed, here's the things that have happened. The child has had the opportunity to tell their story from their point of view. And I'll give you a term that I like to use. What happened before that, right? So they tell you, well, I came around the corner and you pushed that child down. What happened before that? Well, they told me that my artwork was junk. Oh, what happened before that? Well, I told them that their artwork was junk. Oh, and then what happened before that? Well, and you start to discover. So what happened before that is often better than, I don't say don't use it, but it's often better than why, because why puts people on the defensive. Why did you do that? Why are you doing that? It puts people on the defensive because it's more like stop doing what you're doing rather than actually being curious about your behavioral choices. If you've discussed and you have a green light to move on to planning, the counselor and the child have come to some agreement about what happened. If you say you threw a rock and it flew across there and almost hit a bunch of people, and the child says, I never did that, you still have to have some kind of conversation. And you could get hung up there, and that's okay. But you need to try to move past that and find agreement. The counselor, the person there, the teacher, has helped the child to make a connection between feelings and behaviors, and the counselor or teacher has recounted what happened from the adult point of view. So you've told your story. You're always joining with the child. I'm always on your side. I want to figure this out. I want to help you learn from this experience. If you've done all these things, you've discussed, and you can move into planning. The biggest part is that the adult and the child have agreement on the fact that a new game plan is important. Because if they say, and if you've worked with kids long enough, you've heard a kid say, and if she does that again, I'm going to smack her again. That's not a place to move on to planning, right? That's a place where you say, I think we need to talk more about that situation because that's not okay, right? So if a child is throwing out there that they don't agree that anything that they did was wrong, that's another place that you have to move past that and get to agreement. If you don't, that's okay. We can talk about what happens if you get hung up, okay? And then, so you've discussed, here's the thing, guys, so many people miss the discussion part, and it becomes the contain the behavior and plan for the future. The discussion part is where the learning is, it's where the relationship is built, it's where the important stuff happens. So don't miss the discussion. The discussion is not, why did you do that? Okay, here's the plan next time. You go through these steps and you build it. When you plan, here's the stop sign. You plan how we're working towards helping the child find a more successful way of coping in the future. You arrive at a solution that's realistic and behaviorally based, right? So behaviorally based means I can see you doing this from across the room. It's the child who says, when you say, what are you going to do next time? And they say, I just won't get angry. You say, I can't see that from across the room. What are you going to do that I can see from across the room, or that you can tell me about in this moment that I'm going to be able to witness? And so moving through the solution process. And if they throw out something that's really off the wall, sometimes it's fun to use a little humor there and to make jokes about, sure, and and maybe we can all eat popsicles and everything will be great, and bring them back to, let's think of things that we can utilize. What does it look like if I'm across the room? What can I do to help? This is where a child will often come up with a plan of, I'll tell the teacher. And that's great. It's important to communicate, and it's not tattling, and it doesn't break our national policy against snitching. to go and talk to a teacher when you're feeling like you could be doing something that wouldn't be helpful or adaptive. So you communicate confidence once you're in that plan. You communicate confidence in the child's ability to be successful in the future. Sometimes it helps to find a time where that child felt upset and they didn't push somebody down, or they felt upset and they didn't scream and run away. Because then you can say, well, see, you have this, you already have the skills. That's the strength-based approach that we use in social work, and it really does help a child to see themselves as potentially more successful. So you help them remember past successes. Hopefully you have enough experience with that child after a day or two to be able to say, hey, I saw you do something pretty cool the other day, and you were a really good friend in this situation. So I think this is maybe we could pull something out of there that would help you to develop a plan. Okay, and that you plan to get the child back into the game. This is really big, especially across the age range. The last thing you want to do is pull a child to the sideline of the action, so to speak, when they are 13, 14, 15 years old, and not give them some help in getting back into the group, because they're so conscious about what that group think is that they are going to struggle. And you're going to see them potentially recycle into another crisis or another situation just because nobody has helped them to navigate that return into the group. So plan to help the child get back into the group. And again, always joining. Building relationship. How do you know you've planned? The counselor and the child have a plan that's that's realistic and doable. The plan can be applied immediately and is behaviorally based. The counselor has communicated confidence in the child's ability to be successful. Don't put a child out there in a plan that you're like, they're never going to be able to pull this off because they're going to be back sitting down with you or in a worse situation. The child's able to recall and demonstrate the plan. I've had times where I've sat with a child and I've had a conversation about the plan, and I've said, okay, you ready? And they go right back into the situation and they recycle the same behavior, and you say, what happened to our plan? And they go, I don't remember what we talked about. Because a lot of times when adult talks, it sounds like the Peanuts gang teacher that's out there doing the wah, 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 wah. So remember to always practice that plan if possible, and practical. Help them play it out to give them that muscle memory of being able to find the adult that they need for the support, or to walk away from the situation that they need to, or to apply a different behavior at that moment. I mentioned before that we're all wired to resist change. And so thanking the child for being able to engage in this process lets them know how much you appreciate and respect their ability to do this somewhat really hard thing. So thank the child, because the process isn't easy. So when do you use the CDP? It's when the child's participation is disruptive to others, and you want to pick your battles. You have to check yourself and find out if their behavior is disruptive versus annoying. Anybody who's had Behavior 101 in college and has studied B.F. Skinner knows that there is a period in operant conditioning when it's stimulus and response, right? And so that disruptive versus annoying, a lot of times the annoying behavior is the stimulus and response. The child who's doing something and getting a response, and it satisfies them as a social interaction, and they're good, and they're going to keep pushing that button and pushing that button. And when you don't give them the reaction that they're hoping for, they don't get the attention for the negative behavior, because kids will repeat what you notice. Kids will repeat the behaviors that you point out, right? So if you only point out the negative and you never catch them being good, you're going to see all those negative behaviors more, because what we're doing is positively reinforcing negative behaviors. So you want to positively reinforce positive behaviors and catch them being good. When you stop reinforcing the negative behavior, you may see what's called an extinction burst, which is the child coming up and going, Maddie, 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 when you're in the conversation, and you're like, I could either say, hang on a second, and the child will keep doing that behavior, or I can stop and pause and ignore that behavior, planned ignoring. I planned ignore that behavior, and I keep going with my conversation, and the child will go, Maddie, 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 and then the behavior extinguishes. So we have to go with is it disruptive to the whole program or is it annoying to me? That goes for when their lack of participation is disruptive to others. So it's the lack of or the participation that is disruptive, and you have to pick your battles, and is it annoying versus disruptive? When the child's emotional state is hindering their connection to the goals and the outcomes of the program. So if that child is so reserved that they're not engaging and you're not seeing them making steps to build into the program, then that's a time for a CDP. If that child is always out front and always jumping up and always, that's time for a CDP, right? Some people will get worried that this takes too long. It can be literally as long as a minute or 2 minutes. It can be a quick check-in. It depends on how deftly you move through the process. That's why you have to practice the steps of the CDP, the contain, discuss, and plan steps in order to get there. Luckily, they're intuitive, and you probably do a lot of them already, but it's putting them in a predictable sequence that's going to help kids in those times move through them quickly with you. It can take as long as 20 minutes, but if it takes longer than that, then I would say that you may be reinforcing the child's behavior with the attention that you're giving them, and therefore you've moved into this place where you're now, you might be part of the problem. And so if the child says during the time that you're doing your CDP, if a child says, well, yeah, back when I was 4 years old and they're now 10, you're probably in a therapy session and not in a CDP. CDP is a small, usually they're about 10 minutes at most, and you can move through those steps pretty smoothly. So I would say if you find yourself getting caught up on one step, it just takes some practice. And we practice these things with other caregivers. And somebody plays a child and somebody plays an adult. We do this for 3 days of orientation. We have different pockets where we do these practices, and our counselors get pretty good at it. So when the CDP gets stalled, when the child is completely unwilling to talk to you, when they won't calm down, when the child refuses to take ownership of the behavior, when problem solving isn't occurring, when the child is enjoying the attention and drawing you out, stringing you along, the question is, so what now, right? You're stuck. What you'll learn is that there are steps you can take immediately, and that's when you go to the next level. And the next level is you find that next higher authority. This is where our programs need to be structured in a way where there is somebody there who, once that original behavior is being addressed and you're working with that child, there is somebody in reserve that you end up going to. Sometimes if you don't have the structure of staff, the parent ends up being that higher authority. But it's somebody that the child sees as a higher authority that you're pulling in. Depending on the issue, you can re-enter the child with the expectation that you'll do the CDP later. So if it's a low-level thing and you just wanted to address it but you're not getting there, then you can say, you know what, doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. Why don't you go back in and we'll talk a little bit later, but I want you to think about these things, and you re-enter the child. The other thing you can do is you can use that time, you can give the child some self-reflective time, sort of not the timeout, because I think timeout is just training for prison. We give them something to think about and we move them through it. And then that you ask for help from another counselor or a senior staff member. So that might be that higher level, or it might be somebody that's adjacent to you who might just have a different relationship with that child. But changing up the air sometimes really helps. So I'm going to pause there. I've given you a lot of technique. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer questions, hear your thoughts. Know that this presentation is coming to you, and so is the CDP cheat sheet that you can use to help train staff. And I'd be happy to answer questions now or to work with folks going forward. You can also come off of mute and ask a question if you'd like.
That was me coming off mute, Maddie, but now is the time if anyone has those questions for Maddie while he's on the call. I'm not seeing anything in the chat either, Maddie.
Okay, so what I'll do is in order to wrap it up, I just want to remind folks, remember that the general strategies are there in order to build the structure into our program. Remember that that CDP is when you need to pull the kid out of the program to touch base, or it's when you need to help them get into the program. So it's not just for the disruptive behavior, it's also for the disengaged. Remember the stop, look, and listen. Check yourself before you roll in there. Join with the child at every opportunity and build relationship. And remember that your program is more than fun, that you're there to help them develop these skills. The greatest gift that we all have that we can give is your authentic presence. And this picture is of a kid, and the outcome of this interaction was a kid who was on the dock, not catching any fish and really struggling to kind of keep herself occupied and contained. She was pretty bummed out, and just having the awareness and showing up, she and I got connected, and the outcome was catching this fish, but the real outcome was that she had this moment of connection that she and I shared that was really, really important, and that smile on her face just speaks tons to me. So show up. You got to show up to your kids. There are two lasting bequests that you can hope to give your children. One of those is roots. The other is wings. I think you all do that every day, and I'm glad that we got to share some time together. And I would be happy to have you all reach out to me. My contact is here. A lawnmower is coming outside my window. So Kathy, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you all for the time and for asking me to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. That was great. Several of the comments in here, I thought it was a ton of great information and strategies. It's a nice reminder that we can find a lot of joy in this work. Really look forward to sharing this with my staff. Amazing presentation. So you'll have a chance to look at all those great remarks. The one I really appreciate is, it's going to take me a while to process what we talked about. I loved it and really want to try this. So I think it was really, really just excellent, Maddie. We thank you so much for being here today. And for the rest of you, if you have further questions regarding today's webinar, please email the Wisconsin After School Network at the email address that will be provided in the chat box. More information about a series of professional development opportunities in addition to this learning series can be found on the Wisconsin After School Network website, and the web address will also be posted in the chat box. Our next webinar will be next Friday, May 20th, with Dr. Sally Scoville. Dr. Scoville is a professor at UW-Stevens Point in the School of Health Sciences and Wellness. Her presentation will focus on utilizing the dimensions of wellness for self-care. This 90-minute session begins at 11 a.m. We encourage you to participate in this series as we all continue to work to provide quality out-of-school time opportunities for kids and families. Thank you for your participation on today's webinar and for the work you do on behalf of the children and families in the state of Wisconsin. You guys have a great weekend. Maddie, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you all. Keep up your great work out there. The world needs what you got.